Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club meeting for Thursday, January 2nd. My name is John Milliker and I'm the club president for the 2024-2025 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957. It exists to promote the arts, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. For more information about us, please visit arundelcameraclub.org. And we are so happy to be meeting in person and also staying online. If you're local to Anne Arundel County, Maryland, we encourage you to visit us at the Severna Park Baptist Church, located at 506 Benfield Road, Severna Park, Maryland. Before we move to tonight's program, do we have any announcements from our officers? I got a bunch of nods, so that's good. Christine had a prior engagement tonight, so I'm going to talk about the schedule coming up. January 9th, next week, we have the contest digital theme of Open. The 16th is a program from our own Jackie Colstock on geometric shapes. January 19th is a field trip to Eastern State Penitentiary. Very cool. January 23rd is a print contest. That theme is Open. January 30th is tabletop night. Now, Christine and I are going to be unavailable that night, so I'm sure she's going to need some people to bring some lights, some setups. You guys are usually really good at bringing crazy knickknacks. I'm looking at Bob. But anything's great. People brought light tables in before, so whatever you can bring in to share, that's great. She's also got February 6th on the schedule here to our own Ron Pfeiffer on photographing the Southwest. You remember a lot of Ron's great images that have beat out our own images in all the contests. February 8th is a field trip to Washington, D.C. It's a nighttime monument field trip. And February 13th is a contest digital theme of geometric photography. So make sure you're here on the 16th for Jackie's talk on that. I want to announce to people that we have some Christmas ornaments left. If you did not get your ornament, they're $5 each. All the proceeds go to the club. And also, starting in January, we're now half-price dues. So if my math is correct, probably Ron and Bob can check me out there, is $20 for the rest of the year, and you have 36 opportunities to bring images in, print and digital, and get professional feedback on them from our judges. So if you've always been a free member to the club and would like to try your hand at some of our contests, they are very kind and gentle. I swear that. And you get a great opportunity to not only support the club with your dues, but also check out the option of seeing what judges think of your information, your images. Tonight, we're very lucky to have Hazel Meredith with a talk on alternative visual artistry. Something that a speaker that Christine told me about that I've been very excited to listen to. Hazel Meredith, owner of Meredith Images, an award-winning photographer, teacher, speaker, workshop leader, and a highly respected competition judge. Have we ever had her judge for us, Ron? I'll have to get you guys in touch. In 2007, she began teaching post-processing techniques through local adult educational programs and now teaches at camera clubs and conferences across the United States, both in person as well as online. And through her photography workshops, she offers her own webinars on various creative post-processing techniques and has done webinars for several software companies. She released her first book, Working with Textures and Overlays. Hazel may have to, when we turn it over to her, tell me what that book name is. From what I have here, it says Turn Ho Hum into a Work of Art. I think that's Turn Ho Hum into a Work of Art, probably. In 2015, and then she had a sequel in April 2019. She released her first online course, Creating Your Own Textures, in 2022, and her second course in 2023, Understanding Typography and Creating Word Art. In 2017, she and her husband Dave founded the Creative Photography Conference, and after 3 successful live events, they began holding virtual conferences in 2021, which have been a resounding success with attendees across the world. Hazel loves the creative aspects of photography and post-processing, especially the use of textures and various software to create unique images. She enjoys teaching and sharing her techniques to assist other photographers in realizing their own creative visions. Her website for anybody on Facebook is pinned to the top of the chat. Or you can visit her at Meredith Images. That's MEREDITHIMAGES.com. Let's give a warm welcome to Meredith.
screen and what you're seeing. So hopefully that will all flow the right way. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen first. And
Meredith, that's a loop back for just kind of for you. That way you kind of make sure that we're still online, but it will be delayed for you. You're not going to be delayed for us or online.
oh, great. Okay. Um, to show people how to do um, is to just, take that kind of ordinary image and turn it into something fun and different. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And I'm working with two monitors, so you'll see my image just kind of pop up because I'm opening it from my second screen. I will show you how to bring in a texture. If you're only working with one monitor, I usually, because for seminars like this, I have everything all lined up and ready to go on my other screen, so I typically just drag them in. But I will show you how to do it both ways. So this image is a cell phone image. This is a place a couple miles from our house. It's one of the places I take my workshops to. Um, it's a beautiful property with lots of barns and buildings and a house from the 1780s. There's lots of history in our area. We're in Northeast Tennessee now. I've been here for 5 years after living in Connecticut the rest of my life. So this little shed, it was a foggy morning, great fence line, but it's kind of blah. So we're gonna do a little something to jazz it up. So we're gonna start with the Nick collection. And I'm using collection 7, which is their latest. And we're gonna go into our color effects. And with this, I'm going to start with Glamour Glow, one of my favorite plugins here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of glow. I'm going to move that to about 40% or so. And just to kind of give it a little more of that ethereal feel and add to that effect of the fog. So we're going to go ahead and apply that. And then we're going to add a gradient to bring a little more color into our sky. So I'm going to go with a gradient adjustment layer, and that you access through the gradient, through the adjustment panel at the bottom of your layers panel, the black and white circle. And we're going to choose gradient. And it just defaults to whatever probably was last used, but that's okay. We're not going to use that one. We're going to click in this bar, open up our gradients, and I'm going to use one of my own. I'm going to go into my sky gradients 1, and I'm going to use blue sky 1, which let's see which one. Find the right one here. 2. So we're going to use that one, blue sky 1. And excuse me, I want the darker blue at the top and the more yellow color at the bottom. So once I say okay, before I close this panel, I'm going to click on reverse, and that's going to flip the colors the way that I want them to be. So I'm going to say okay. And now the way we work with gradients as well as textures is by changing blending modes and opacities. And that makes this layer interact with our layer below it. So I'm going to change my blending mode to multiply, which is a darkening blending mode. And then I brought back the opacity a little bit, probably about here. So I'm going to add a little bit of color, but not overpower it. And then I'm going to add another gradient. So we're going to add another gradient layer. And this time I'm going to use just a default black to transparent. And we can find that under basics. We have a black to transparent here. I'm going to use this one. And again, I'm going to flip that. around and say okay. And this one we're going to change to soft light, which is one of the latest blending modes. And it's going to give a little more color to the top part of this layer. And I'm also going to lower that just a little bit, opacity. So again, without it, with it, it just darkened that top part just a little bit. And I do want to mask a little bit of the yellow blue color from our shed. So I'm going to go into the layer mask on that texture or that gradient, grab a brush, and I'm just using I want to use a soft round brush, foreground color black, and we're just going to mask that off of here. I don't want that blue tint on the shack itself. I could make my brush a little bigger and make that go a little bit quicker. And then you can see over here on the layer mask where I masked that away. And then if you want to also mask the black to transparent the same way, you can copy this mask by making sure you're selected the mask and hold down your Alt or Option key, click and drag that mask up here. Now we'll ask to replace it because there already was a blank mask there, so I'm going to say yes. If you didn't have a mask already on that layer, it would just copy it. And then if you wanted to lower the kind of the opacity of the masking, so you didn't take quite all of the color off, I'm going to do that with this layer. I'm going to select that mask, and if you double click in the mask, it opens the properties panel, and the density slider is like opacity. So I'm going to bring that back about halfway, and we'll leave it there. So you can see it's now more gray because we've taken some of that mask down in transparency. And that's our first image. And you can always go back, like with any layer, you can come back in here, change your opacity if you want to add more color. Same thing here. If you decide, well, I want a little bit darker, we can do that. So feel free to ask questions. If you're online, you can unmute yourself and ask them. If you're in the room, you can pass the questions along and they will get asked of me. So any questions on that one?
Meredith, we have a question. Excuse me, Hazel.
Sure.
You have two first names,
That's
and
okay.
I'm sorry
I know
keep calling you
everybody does
Meredith.
it. That's okay.
Can you bring up the original and put them side by side?
Sure. I can also do a quick before and after. So there was our before, and there's our after. So you can see it was very, because of the fog, it was very pale in the sky, not a lot of color. And by adding those gradients, the little bit of glamour glow softened everything and then added some more color to our sky.
Very nice. Thank you.
Sure. All right. So we can close that for now. So next up, this is not really a barn or a vintage item, but I just really like this and I thought it fit well with this presentation. So this one we're going to use some Luminar Neo and then some textures. And this was actually another cell phone image. It was early morning and there was some dew on things and the background is just other little grasses and it just naturally the way the bokeh appeared. I did not create that. So I'm going to duplicate my layer, which I usually do when I'm working with like the Nick products create its own layer, but Luminar and Topaz and other products generally don't. So I like to duplicate it. So my originals here, if I do something on this layer that I don't like, it's easy to just delete the layer and still have your original and not have to reverse everything. So I'm going to go into my filters and go to Skylum and my Luminar Neo. And in here, I'm going to do a little bit of denoising, which I could also use the Topaz denoise and sharpen. Both of them work equally well. So I'm just going to go into edit and we're going to go to our noiseless AI. And I'm going to use the middle one. And for a few seconds gets this little geometric thing going. It's analyzing the image. Usually doesn't take too long. There we go. So you can, if I click in here, oops, that brought it back to shape. Let's do where's our split screen? Nope, it wants to just reset it. Even I can do a before and after. Oh, here we go. We could do it this way with the eyeball. So that would be our before. You can see how noisy it is. And that's the after. And it's brought that down quite a bit. So now I also am going to add a little bit of sharpness in here to about there, just to sharpen up our little fluffy thing here. And then we're going to go ahead and apply that, and that will take us back to Photoshop. And then we're going to use some textures on this to give it a lot more color and a lot more oomph. So, like I said, I could drag textures in from my other screen, but to show you if you want to add a texture, you can go into Edit, and I'm sorry, into File and Place Embedded. And then you can go to the file that you're working on, which is this one here. I already have it open, and I'm going to use number 2B, multicolored. So you could just select your texture from there, and it will add it as a separate layer, which is what we need because we need to be able to change that blending mode and opacity. And it will do the same thing when I drag in a texture. And all of these textures I'm using tonight are my own from sets on my website. So we're going to change this one to overlay. So when you're working with blending modes, if you're not familiar with them, this group are the darkening blending modes. This group will lighten the effect, and this group works with the midtones and contrasts of your image. So we're going to work with overlay and bring down the opacity to about there. And I'm going to add a layer mask on this one. And I want to take just a little bit of the color off of this little fluffy grass. So I'm going to use a soft round brush, and I'm going to make it, I figured out when I've done it before, 600 pixels. And I'm going to lower the opacity of the brush about 2/3. So it doesn't have to be exact. I just kind of click about 2/3 of the way there. And I'm going to just do one swipe along that. And you can see it took just a little bit of color off. You can see it's just gray here. And if I turn that mask off for a second, you'll see with the color and then without it. So it brings a little more of the whiteness back to that. And I'm going to add, so I'm going to just drag my textures because it's quicker since I have the second monitor. This is one of my sunrise, sunset skies. So we're going to stretch that one out. And we're going to change this one to soft light and bring this way down to about 20%. I just want to start warming it up a little bit. Okay. So when you're working with textures, if you choose like the browns, the reds, the oranges, it's going to warm your images. If it's more of the blues and the greens, it's going to cool down the look of your image. And then the next one is another bokeh texture. So I'm going to emphasize the bokeh on this one a little bit. And this one I'm changing to overlay. And I left that one at 100%. And now I also want to mask this one off so I can copy this mask. Again, just hold your Alt or Option key, click and drag it. Okay. So now I want to add some blur to this a little bit to the texture. So I want to create a merged layer. And what that is, some people call it a stamped layer. I want to combine these layers, but I don't want to flatten everything. I don't want to lose what I've done. So you can create a merged layer, and the keyboard shortcut on a PC is Control Alt, Shift, and the letter E. On a Mac, it's Command Option Shift E. So now you can see I have an image here that merges all these layers without flattening what's below it, just in case I want to go back to them. And I always rename this merged so I know what that layer is. And then I'm going to duplicate that because I want to leave this one as is. And then I'm going to add some blur. So we're going to go into our filter and to our blur gallery, and I'm going to use the field blur. And I'm going to do this at 15 pixels. And then we're going to say, where's my, okay. And you can see, so now I have this blurred image. And then what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to rename this blur. And then I'm going to turn this off for a second. And I'm going to click on this merged layer. And I'm going to select our grass head. So I'm going to use the quick selection tool. And I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to do a rough, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to get most of this subject. Whoops, not all of it. Let's try that again. You can't go too far because then it wants to select your background. That will work. And then from there, I want to put that selection on a separate layer. So I'm going to use my Control J, which is how I normally duplicate my layer. But when you do a Control J, when you have a selection, it will copy just that selection to a separate layer. And then I'm going to bring that above my blur and turn the blur back on. So you can see this part is sharp. Even though the edges are soft, we can still work with that and bring some more of that back. So we've moved that. So now I'm going to add a layer mask. And I want to do that on the blur layer. And I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So I want to erase some of the blurred areas. Oops, not on there. I have to do a mask. Get ahead of myself. So we can bring back some of these edges here so that they're sharper, which is what we want. But it was quicker to just like kind of make this selection first and then bring these back a little at a time. And I should bring my brush up a little bit higher. There we go. And I'm doing this quickly. You can do it, you know, with a little more smaller brush and really take your time to do this. But I have lots of good stuff I want to show you, so I want to do this quick. Okay, that will do. And then I'm going to bring in another texture above everything. And this is one of my Cosmos textures. And I love this series. I have 4 different sets that have these kind of starry type of a look to it, but they work great for a lot of different things. And I'm going to change this to soft light, which is our latest blending mode, and bring down our opacity about 35, 36. And then one last texture. It's this one. And what else? This is another Cosmos. And also make this one soft light. And we're going to bring that way down to about 22. And then I decided once I was done with this image that I wanted to flip the whole thing horizontally so that it's kind of going from left to right instead of, you know, leading down to the right. So I'm just going to go to image rotation because I want to flip everything. Flip canvas horizontal. And then I cropped a little bit off of this side to about there. And there we have it. So we went from this pretty boring, monotone sort of type of image to something with a little more pizzazz. Any questions on that?
No, done right now.
Okay. Now, a question I do get a lot when I'm showing textures and things is, how do you decide what texture to use? And a lot of it comes from practice. You'll never always know exactly what texture you want. It is some trial and error, but the more you do it, the more you'll get a feel for, how colors will mix. And, I know I wanted to add bokeh, so I went to that particular, group to pick some. And I wanted to warm it up, so I chose some of, these nice warm tone textures. So it is trial and error. And I think it was mentioned in my intro, I also do my own webinars. I have one coming up on January 28th. The webinars are free. I do optionally sell the notes that go with them, which include the images and any textures or anything else used with it, so you can recreate the projects at home. But all of my webinars are on my YouTube channel. And before I went online this afternoon, I sent Christine some info to send out to you guys. So there'll be a sheet with all of links to all of the software I've used tonight and products I've used, and as well as info about me and all my contact info, and some of the other stuff coming up with us and our conference that we have coming up in February. So you can check out that, and go to my YouTube channel. I think I'm coming up on number 42 or 3 this month. I've been doing them for almost 5 years now. And they're on a lot of text, a lot of subjects. And I have done a couple. Actually, I did one the latter part of last year on how do I choose textures, because usually I do have them pre-selected like I do tonight. But instead, for that webinar, I just chose some images, and the webinar was me live choosing textures and how I do that. And sometimes you'll try one, you don't like it. I usually bring in, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 and turn them all off and try them one at a time, and then see if I think I'm going to like it with that image. And then, as you can see, I love to work with multiple textures to just really develop that depth of color and interest. So check those out, and that will give you some more insight on that if you'd like to play around with that. So this is an old gas station. I did take out, there was a sign here that was kind of annoying me in the middle of everything, and I used some AI to just get rid of that, and it filled it in really well. I did edit this one in Luminar Neo, and then in Photoshop I removed that sign with the generative AI. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and we're going to go into our Nick again, into our color effects. And sometimes I like to try, let's get this to fit instead, like to try some of the effects that I don't normally try on an image, or that I only use occasionally. So on this, you can see the ones I favorited with the yellow star. Those are ones I use quite often. For this one, I'm going to use Monday Morning, which I've starred to make it easy to find if I wanted it, but I don't use it all that much because it doesn't always work with all kinds of images. So with Nick, I'm sure a lot of you use this product. You have your presets over here, and then you can make all your adjustments over here on the right. So this one, I'm going to change the brightness just a tad. The smear I brought down so it's not quite so blurry looking. And the shadows I brought up a little bit to about there. And then I'm going to add another filter, And in the older versions of Nick, there used to be a button, a plus sign to add a filter. Or so now what you need to do is come over. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm not adding another effect. I'm going to go to analog effects. But if you did want to add another filter from here, you just hover over it and hit the plus sign, and that will add it below this one and not replace what you've already done. One of the things they have in this latest version is now, instead of me hitting apply, going back to Photoshop and then reopening another program, it will kind of do all those steps for me by using this switch to. And I'm going to go into analog effects. So it's going to save it to Photoshop and then reopen it in analog effects pretty quickly instead of me manually doing all those steps. So in here, I'm going to go into cameras. I'm going to do classic camera, and I'm going to use number 4. And then we're going to make some changes over here to our film type. I'm going to go, instead of cool, into the warm section and use this green number 3. And then under dust and lint, we're going to change it to scratches. And we're going to use this last one. And I'm going to make the strength on that about 59 because it defaults to 0, so you don't really see anything when you first hit it. But it's kind of like, you know, on an old photo, you have some scratches. And then from here, I'm going to switch back to color effects. And I'm going to go into the image borders. I should just hit my favorites. There we go. And I'm going to use border number 10. And then I'm going to change the size because I don't want it to be that big. So we're going to bring that down. And the spread. And what the spread does is affects the width of the like little shadow at the edge. And then I'm going to grunge it up, bring that all the way up. And that should do it. And then we'll apply. And there we are back in Photoshop. So I can reduce that down. So we went, in this case, from this photo to, you know, something really looks like an old photo out of somebody's old scrapbook from way back when. And again, the effects can be changed to your own taste and modified. Maybe you don't like the scratches on here. You could not use any or use something more subtle. It's always, you know, playing around with the different sliders and seeing what they can all do and see what you like. Any questions?
None right now, no.
Okie dokie. So next we have another barn. This one's about an hour from our house. Actually, one of the gals on her way to my workshop found this when they were driving up that way, and she's like, "Oh, you've got to see this." So we were going that general direction, and they showed me a barn that I hadn't found yet. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate that. And first thing I want to do is replace the sky. So we're going to do that here in Photoshop, edit, and our sky replacement. And we're going to click this drop down area, even though that's pretty, that's not the one I'm going to use. And we're going to close that one up. And I'm going to use one of mine from my Puffy Clouds 2. Use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to use that one. And I'm going to make, click off here. I'm going to make the scale of it a little bit bigger, which will enlarge it. And then you can move it around. So you can put the clouds wherever you want it to be. Just make sure that the bottom of the image is below your horizon. So that was why I made it bigger so that it would fit this particular image. And then under my sky adjustments, I brightened the sky just a teeny bit. And then I always like to output to new layers so that if I want to make changes to any masking or anything, I can do that in Photoshop. Say OK. And then you can see you have all of the layers here and the way that it was masked and what it did. It's my brightness adjustment. So I could still go back and adjust that if I wanted to. And it puts this whole, bunch of adjustments into a folder so you can collapse it to save space if you want to over here. So now I want to tone down this brighter side of the barn. So I'm going to use a quick selection tool and just select this area here, kind of like that. And again, Control J. And we're going to put that on a separate layer. And then I'm going to add a brightness and contrast adjustment, but I only want that to affect this layer, not the whole image below it. So if you hold your Alt or Option key and put your cursor between the layers, you'll get that little box with the arrow. If I click there, it's going to clip this adjustment to this layer so it only affects that area. So now I can reopen it and I'm going to bring down the brightness to about there. Okay, so you can see before it's really bright. So now we've toned that side down. And now again, I want to create a merge layer because I want to do some stuff to the whole image. So I'm going to do my Control Alt Shift E. And that's my merge. And I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer. And again, I'm going to clip it to that layer. And then we're going to make some changes in here to the tones of our colors. So the yellows, 71. The greens are going to be minus 27, 22, minus 10, and magenta's 90. Okay. So we can close that. And then I'm going to bring in a texture. And this is one that already is kind of a black and white. It's sort of like a warm black tone. And we're going to change this to multiply. And then lower our opacity. And I did specifically choose a texture with this kind of darker border. So it's kind of already, built in a little bit of a vignette to it. And then I'm bringing in one more border. And this is one from one of my border sets that also come as brushes and also has these PNGs with the transparent center. And I'm going to change, instead of this being black, I want to change the color to white. So I'm going to make my foreground color white. And then I want to change the color of it. Normally I could do like an Alt backspace and that would fill a layer with color. But if I did that here, it would change the whole layer, which is not what we want. We just want to change the pixels that have color. So if you hold the Shift key and do an Alt backspace or Option delete, it becomes, the transparent stays transparent. And then we are going to change this to, we're going to leave it at 100% and normal, but I want the border to not encroach so much on here. So I'm going to grab my move tool and I'm going to just stretch this out beyond the edges of the image, the texture itself. So I'm only getting a little bit of that white and not quite so much of it. And then I'm going to add a layer mask, and I want to brush off some of the white from the center. So we're going to do our brush, make this bigger, make that at 100%, and just kind of go like this and get rid of where I don't want that white texture to be. I just want it to be around the edges and not in the center where my subject is. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to my black and white adjustment, which is here, and double click to reopen that. And I decided to change the reds to 100 and brighten that up a little bit. And the yellows I brought up to about 85. So I just wanted to brighten those tones in there a little bit. And then lastly, we're going to do another merged layer. Alt Shift E. And I'm going to add a gradient map. So in our first project, we used a gradient where that's applying color equally to the image, irregardless of what the colors below it were. It was just putting like a wash of color of that blue to yellow over it. What a gradient map does is literally map the colors of the gradient to the darkest colors of the gradient or go on the darkest pixels. The lightest colors of the gradient will go onto the lightest colors of your image. And then, you know, the midtones will follow along. So we're going to add a gradient map adjustment layer, which is up here. Again, it just defaults to 1, so don't worry about that. We're going to open that up. And I've picked the colors that I wanted, so I'm going to just use this kind of as my basis because I have just a dark color and a light color. So to create a gradient, you just click in this little color box here, and then in the color box here. And because I already know the color, I'm going to type it in 3C3721. Normally you would, you know, select an area and, you know, just move around here and click to find your color. And then look in here. And this one's going to be F0E9CD. So I've chosen kind of a sepia tone. And then if you decide you don't like this is maybe a little bit too yellow, you can just go back in here and pick something, you know, you could go a little bit lighter. Do it that way. And if you wanted to add more color stops, you can, but for a basic gradient to do something like this, this would be sufficient. And you can see how the, you know, the gradient truly is mapped to this image. You know, the darkest tones have picked up the darkest color of the gradient. And again, the lightest tones, the whites, are going to pick up that brightest color. And there you have it. And in this case, I could have probably done this without that layer, without the merge. It's just kind of my workflow. I like to do that sometimes. Any questions? I know we did lots of stuff to this one to get where we are.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, two questions. When it was a colored picture and you added a sky, I noticed that you didn't match the sky.
Okay. So we went from that image to something, again, very antique-y, old. And if you decided after you applied this border you didn't really like it, you could definitely, you know, bring in something different. You can, you know, delete any layer at any time and just change it to something else.
Now,
So
what
it's
he
a
was
lot
asking
about-
for was when you replaced the sky, he noticed that you didn't mask it out ahead of time.
You don't need to with Photoshop. It does it for you. So if you look down here in this sky replacement group, here's my sky, and Photoshop did the masking for me.
But as far as matching that color, that sky, to to the warm tone of the image itself. You didn't worry about that. And my other question is, what do you think about taking that sky and blurring it, that it gives it a type of more depth, that it's farther out than the other?
Did you hear that? He mentioned
Not really.
the potential for blurring the sky out.
For blurring it?
Right.
You mean this one or what was already there? Because there wasn't a whole lot of.
Your replacement sky, blurring it, and for a little bit of
You
a
could.
depth feel.
Yes, you definitely can do that. Let's turn everything back on. See if I gotta do it this way now. You could do that. I think there is, if we go into, whoops, I want to zoom up, I want to scroll up. Let's try going into our sky. Edit. No, it won't let me do that because I'm on an adjustment layer. Edit. Sky replacement. I think they do have a blur. Brightness, temperature, scale. No, actually, well, yeah, they only have fade edges. Yeah, they don't here, but you definitely, if you wanted to blur it, you could come back to this layer and just add, a Gaussian blur adjustment on top of it. So you could just go into your filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and, make it however soft you want it to be from just, a little bit. So yeah, you could definitely modify that after the fact. That would be the best way.
Luminar, okay? And on the sky replacement on Luminar, it does it different, and you could do all that in Luminar. So she's using Luminar.
He's saying that you could do the same thing in Luminar.
Yes, you can.
Nice.
Luminar actually has sky replacement before Photoshop. So I used to do all my skies in Luminar. And then now, just because I'm here in Photoshop, I did it here, but you definitely, it works very similarly. And you can still bring in your own skies as well in both programs.
Any other questions? No, we're good.
Alrighty. So next up, I'm going to take this old car. I love shooting old rusty cars. This one was in, I can't remember now what city. It was on Route 66. I think it was Miami, Oklahoma. It's spelled like Miami, but they say Miami. You get corrected out there if you're wrong. It's like down here in the South, I say a lot of the towns wrong because it's Blountville is Blountville. So there's a lot of letters they like to leave out and things down here. This also was a cell phone shot. I did crop it and I edited it in Camera Raw. So we've started here. So this one, I'm going to use a different plugin. I'm going to use Smart Photo Editor. And this is a really fun program. It's very inexpensive. You can buy it. The standalone version is $29.95. If you want to be able to use it as a plugin, it's $49.95. But there are literally thousands of effects in here. You can do basic editing too, but I mostly use it for the effects. It's a great way to take a texture and modify it into a different texture, which I do with a lot of I do a blog twice a week, and on Sundays I give away 3 free textures every week. And it's my Sunday sampler. And I'll take a texture and I'll make various versions of it with this program, or sometimes with other things too. But this one I do a lot. So this one we're going to go to our filter, and it's by a company called Anthropics, and it's Smart Photo Editor. I learned of this program years ago when I met Mike Moats at a seminar, because this is almost exclusively what he uses on all his macro stuff. So when you first come in here, it just opens it up. You can see there's, all your basic tools over here if you want to use, do some editing. But I usually just go right to the effects gallery. And the cool thing about this is when you use it for the first time, like I am today, when I close it, it's going to look for new effects, because all of these effects are created by users of the program. So you can create effects and share them if you wish with the community. So it's really cool. So there are always something else in there. And you can see there are 694 pages with 12 on a page. So because that would take you an enormous amount of time to go through all the time, you can narrow down what you want to do. So in this case, I was looking for something grungy. So I went to style and then went to grunge. So I've narrowed it to 142 pages. But because I already know the one that I want, so I don't have to go scrolling through, I'm going to type it in the search bar and hopefully I can get it to pop up. Sometimes they give you a little trouble here. Grungy texture 004. So that's the one I'm using. And I don't always change these a whole lot because they usually come out pretty cool. But once you select the one you want, this one really just has a fade, like an opacity, but it will vary over here what you can adjust on a texture depending on how it was created and what the maker, listed here. So I'm going to show you a couple of others that I did find in here that I liked. A lot of times I will try more than one to see what I like. So this was another cool one. So this one you can see it has a couple little different things, but I'm not sure, I don't remember it having that white frame in the center of it before. That's a little odd. And sometimes you can delete, like if they have a border, it will say remove padding. So like that border will go away. I don't remember seeing that before, which is kind of weird. So let's try another one. And that's the one that I ended up going with that I liked the most. So you see this one has a border. First I need to select it. And then I'm going to go to, this one doesn't have a lot of changes either. Usually if there's a border, it will have that remove padding so you can kind of just delete it, but you could always crop it off in this case. So I did, not the one I ended up with. Actually, let's go back to our first one because then we won't have that border because I'm going to do a couple other things with it. But I just wanted you to see how some of them, the different ones, and they're really very cool. So let's work with that one. So once because I typed it in, I just have to say okay and then click OK here. And then I'm going to do a file, save and return. That will take it back to Photoshop. And here's where it's searching for any new effects. It takes just a minute. Like I said, it only does it like once a day if you open it on a different day. There we go. And again, this is why I duplicate my layer because it's does not make its own layer. And a lot of times what I'll do if I want to try some different things here is turn this layer off, come back here, reduplicate this, and then try another effect. So you can have like 2 or 3 different ones in here so you can see them side by side kind of thing. So that's another way you can do that. So you can also now, because it is a separate layer, I can lower the opacity of that a little bit to lessen the effect some. And then I went back into, let's duplicate this. I'm going to go back into Smart Photo Editor. And I'm going to find a border that I do like. So we're going to go to the effects gallery. And they do have a borders category. And they do have one that's vintage. And there's only a few pages, but let's see if we can actually it's this one right here, small gradient border. That's the one I want. So this one's kind of like a little bit of a vignette. So here on the master fade, I'm going to bring that back down a little so it's not quite so heavy. And then do an OK and a file, save and return. So very quickly we can turn something that was, a pretty cool photo anyway, and add some grunge to it, and then add a border. I could also, bring in textures, but this is just another way of doing something. Any questions on that one?
The name, can you let us know the name of that again, Hazel?
It is Smart Photo Editor. And it's by
Thank
a
you.
company called Anthropics. It'll be on that list that you're getting, that I sent to Christine with all of the apps that I used tonight. There's a link on there as well. So next up, we're going to take another old building. This is an old mill. My husband now got talking with a gentleman online who just bought this last year, or maybe about a year and a half ago. And they bought the property because they want to put a house next to it, but this was part of the property. Unfortunately, it's beyond saving. The floors on this part, you can see, is really sagging and gone. He did let us go in with him, but you could not walk on this side. Surprisingly, the stairs were in good shape, and Dave went upstairs. There's still some of the old milling equipment in there. And one time when we were there, he had people coming from the state, like a preservation society, to see what they could do with it. I didn't hear the results of that. I have to ask him about that. But this print, what we're going to end up with, I put on a canvas print for him, and they really loved it. So this one, we're going to go to our Nick, and we're going to go into silver effects. And I love silver effects, and I use it for most of my black and whites because there's so many options in here. Also, the more vintagey things, not just black and white. So we're going to go into, let's go to all of them. And I'm going to go to my old vintage. And we're going to make a few adjustments. Go here to the brightness and bring it just a hair. And then shadows. We're going to up that a little bit. And then we're going to apply that and go back to Photoshop. And then I'm going to bring in a texture. And this is one of my grungy ones. So when I applied this one, when I started playing with the blending modes, and this one I tried, multiply is really dark, color burn. I kind of like, but I liked the texture it was giving it, but I didn't like the color. It was too much color. So the way I said you could clip adjustments to just one layer, I'm going to turn this texture into a black and white because I really don't need the color. I just want the texture. So we're going to add a black and white adjustment layer, and I'm going to clip it to the texture layer. So now this adjustment's only going to affect the texture and not anything else. So I'm going to, let's open this up, and I'm going to bring the reds down to darken that a little. And the yellows, I also brought down because it was a little too bright once it was a black and white. I want to be at about 12. Okay. So now I'm going to do my, whoops. Now we got to go back to the texture layer, not the adjustment layer. And now if we do our multiply, I ended up doing color burn, which is not one I typically use, but then bring down the opacity to about there. So before the texture, after the texture. So we're adding a little more contrast, a little more color to it. It's adding a subtle texture. And then I kind of like the way the edges from the preset in Nick kind of faded a little, so I wanted to emphasize that a little bit. So I want to add a vignette, which you can do yourself in Photoshop at any point. So what we're going to do is add a blank layer. And typically you're doing a black vignette, but we're going to work with a white vignette this time. But the steps are the same. Our foreground color is white, so I'm going to do my Alt backspace or Option delete and fill that layer with white. I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool way up here at the top. Put my cursor almost to the top corner, click, hold, and drag it down to the lower corner. And now I want to soften this circle, because if I delete the circle right now, it's going to have a very hard edge, which is not going to work for what we want. So we're going to go into select, modify, feather, and I usually leave it at 250, which is a nice soft circle. Say OK. And then just hit either your delete or your backspace key, and you can see now how soft that is. Control or Command D to deselect our circle. And then we are going to, and usually with a vignette, you're typically just playing with the opacity. But I found, because I wanted this kind of the photo itself to look like it was fading and not just have this white edge, I'm going to change my blending mode to overlay. And then I brought the opacity to about 60%. So you can see it just very subtly kind of made the edges start to wash out a little. That was before it, and that's after it. But it doesn't look like it was something added on top, because it's not completely covering, you know, the details of the trees and things. It's just making them fade. So I thought that was a cool way to do that. And there you have it. And again, I printed this on canvas and it looked really great. Any questions?
No, not right now.
Okie dokie. And we're going to do, this is the Blue Springs Lutheran Church. It's a few towns over from us, about 25 minutes away. They are starting to get grants to do some renovations on it. You can see down here at the bottom, they a couple summers ago, this is the way it was, and now you can see some brick piers under it because they've cleared away. The wood touching the ground was starting to deteriorate. So now they didn't raise it, but they replaced some of the piers underneath. And unfortunately, this cool porch is now just a concrete porch with a wooden railing, which doesn't really fit, but it's, you know, again, they're trying to preserve it, and they are going to be painting it. I'm like, no, don't paint it. This past spring, when I was on a workshop, there was actually a couple people in there from the church, and we stopped and it was like, can we see the inside? And they're like, oh yeah, come on in. They were getting ready for a big event that weekend. It's not an active church right now, but they do have some special events. And it was really neat to see the inside, and they had lots of newspaper articles that were mounted and things for the history. This is from during the Civil War. There was tons and tons of history in this area. This is where Davy Crockett came through when they were heading west, and lots of battles were fought, and the Battle of Blue Springs was fought here. It was a hospital before this was the third building on this site. So that's what this stone over here tells some of the history, and there's a plaque out by the road. So it's really neat to kind of get the history of all these old places. But anyway, for this one, we are going to use another program. And this program I first found as a phone app. And in my creative iPhone class or smartphone class, because these apps are both iPhone and Android. It's called JixiePix, Jixipix. They've got about 15 or 16 different apps for the phone, and you can also purchase individual apps, or I have a bundle of 18 apps here in my computer. So under my filters, I'm going to go to JixiePix, and that's how you spell it. And you can see these are all of the ones I have. And the one I have, it's called the Premium Pack, and it's regular $119.99, but they also have sales like Black Friday and a couple other times during the year. So follow my blog because I always put those in there. And let's see, I'm going to use Grunge-tastic for this, which is one of my favorite, of course, because I love my textured looks. So this is another way that you can create kind of the antique-y look. So when you first open it, it's just going to randomly pick a preset, which odds are is not going to be anything that's going to look good on the image that you have. But excuse me, let me grab some water. What I like about their programs is all of them have the same interface and work the same way. And all of their presets are very customizable. So this one has probably more than most. It's got a whole bunch of different groups of presets down here. And I'm going to go to the grunge category. And I'm going to use grunge 13. So once I have this, I can come over here to the right and you can change the tone of this. Like I want it to be not quite so bright and yellowy. So I'm going to click in the color box and you can move the sliders to change it to what you want. So I'm going to go about there and green about there, and the blue I brought down a little bit more. So it's not quite such a yellowy color. Now we're at a lighter color up here. And of course, to find this color, I just clicked around just like a typical color picker to find that color. And so I'm going to click off of there. And then you can, if you need to, change the black threshold, enhance contrast. And then they also have, this one has 2 textures and a border on it. And you can change the textures as well. So this first one, and they have a lot of different textures in here. This one has 108. And I am going to change it to number, it's on 59. I went with 61, which is a more subtle texture. And I brought the strength. You don't see the number until you start moving the slider. About there. And then the second one, I went to number 11. And the strength here. And then the edge, I changed. Again, this one has like 30. I went with number 26. I wanted a little bit smaller border. I didn't want it to be encroaching as much on the image. And then I'm going to bring down the strength of that a little bit as well. So if you don't have it 100%, it's not pure white, it brings back a little bit of the color as well. And like this texture is kind of like a reddish brown. If you don't want that, we can go in here and change it. Maybe something that kind of fits better with the others. You can go with something lighter, something darker. It's all very customizable, which I like. And then once you like what you have, just click on apply to photo, and that will take you back to Photoshop. And there you have it. So these are really cool programs. The different things they have, if we look at it, this is like watercolor painting, artista haiku, which is very different, oil painting, sketches, cartoon looks, chalk painting. Chromatic edges are great for borders. Their black and white is really good. I use that on my phone a lot. Again, the Grunge-tastic. NIR is a faux infrared, more comics, kind of like the big dots in them. Portrait painters, kind of like a sort of watercolory. You can add rain with rainy days or snow with snow days. They have an HDR. Just vintage scene is another one I use a lot. That and Grunge-tastic and the black and white are probably my 3 most used ones. But I do also like some of the painterly ones are really nice. And I'm going to show you the vintage one in the next project. So any questions there? And again, if you don't have some of these programs, you don't have to run out and buy everything. You can do something similar with, the Nik if you have the Nik, or, Smart Photo Editor. It's just, I'm kind of giving you options of some of the stuff that's out there and what you can do to change your photos.
No questions here, but I shared the Jixie pics on the Facebook, and it looks like they're still running a 40%
Oh, good.
holiday sale. Yes, JC.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. All right. Yeah, that's a good time to get the packages like
Hold
that.
on 1 second. We have a question.
Sure.
Have you tried doing all of that without all of the plugins, with just in, say, Photoshop and ACR or either Lightroom to get all of that, these particular effects? Can you do that?
Can you get these same effects with a lot of these programs in just Photoshop and Lightroom? That's the question.
Some of them maybe, doing like a sepia, you probably could, but Lightroom I think would be harder because you can't do layers, so you can't bring in textures or anything like that in Lightroom. In Photoshop, you definitely would have more flexibility. And a lot of these I could probably, if I worked at it, could create these with, my textures and, changing things to black and white and sepia in that. So you could do a lot more in Photoshop for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. This is another barn in our area. This one kind of was sitting up on a hill. Liked this one a lot. Let's duplicate that. So this time we're going to go to our filter, go to Jixie Pics, and we'll use that vintage one. And we're going to go to the faded time category. And I'm going to use number 5. And I'm definitely not going to use that border, but we're going to go over here. The fade out, I took all the way to 100. Image strength, all the way to 100. And enhance image, brought down to about there. And then we're going to change this texture to number 62. And then the border, we're changing to 21. So just a very simple border, not the old postcard kind of thing. And then the paper age, we can change that color a little bit. Again, it's all customizable, which is really cool. 74 and about there. So a little more towards the black and white instead of the sepia on that one. And it's definitely added a lot of grain to this image. The other cool thing that all of their programs have, if you look in the upper right, the little pair of dice, and what that does is randomly apply a preset. So this is the one, where we would end up here. But just to give you an example, this is something fun, kind of I like to do like on my phone, or I'll do them on my iPad if I'm like sitting watching TV and I want to play around with a photo. And it just randomly will apply different presets, and sometimes they look horrible. And sometimes you'll find something you go, hey, that's pretty cool. And you can play around with the adjustments. The thing is, if you find one that you like, make sure you save it because you may not get back to that one, or remember which category it was in. But yeah, all of their programs have that. So it's kind of a fun way to experiment. If you're not sure what you want to start with on an image, you can just play around and find them that way. Okay, so I'm just gonna quit that one. I'm not gonna save it since we've changed it a bunch of times. And I got one more for you. No. So we're going to do something different in Smart Photo Editor. So this is Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, Texas. It's from our Route 66 workshop. And if you're not familiar with it, Cadillac Ranch is 10 Cadillacs buried nose down into the dirt. And over the years, it became the thing to spray paint when you go there. And they actually have a trailer there now that sells spray paint, or you can bring your own. And it's probably about a quarter-mile walk from the road out to this field. And not so much this one, but there's a couple to the left of this that because of the hot summer sun, the paint is so thick on there that it's actually like puddling at the bottom. It's just like sliding down off of the hoods of these cars. It's really pretty cool. So I decided to play around with this and see what I could do other than just, the basic photo. So I'm going to duplicate this and we're going to go into the Smart Photo Editor. And they have a couple of kind of cool little things in here besides just basic effects. So we're going to go in here and we're going to go into the borders category. And they have some that are triptychs. And I thought that could be a fun thing to do, something like this with it. So I'm going to apply this. And that gives you a triptych of your image. So you can select that one and then file, whoops, say okay, and then file, save and return. So then I wanted to add a texture to the background of this. So I need to remove the white background. So because the preset, when I tried doing it, you can see right down here, there's a couple little faint black lines. I got a better result by selecting the different box, each square, and then putting those on a separate layer. So I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to draw around this first square. And you want to get pretty much right on the edges, but not beyond the edge, which I might be a little bit over there. So I want to add to my selection because I want to make another square. So I need to hold my shift key because if I started just drawing here, it would replace that first selection. So I'm going to hold the shift key and keep holding the shift key. Try and get these pretty close to the edges. And like we did before, now if I do a Control J, it's going to put those on a separate layer. So if I turn these off, you can see I just have those shapes with nothing in the background. So I'm going to add a blank layer in here above these because I don't really need these anymore, but I'm going to add a blank layer and I'm going to fill it with white. And I'll show you why I like to do this beneath textures when I'm working with a transparent background. So I'm going to bring in my texture. And I just thought this kind of went with it, kind of that sand sort of look. But obviously that's much too dark. And you can see I got a little bit of the white edges here, but for this demo, this will work. But you could definitely go back and, get rid of those. that's much too dark. I want it to be a much lighter brown. So the reason I have the white here is I can lower the opacity of this without it becoming transparent. If I didn't have the white layer, then you can see it's just a transparent color, which isn't really going to work. So this solid white lets me reduce that opacity and not become transparent. So the way you could fix this easily is if you grab just your eraser tool. Let's go to our shape layer. And just make sure it's at 100%. You can draw a straight line by, and we want to be on a hard brush. Yep, all the way to a hard brush. If you click where you want the line to start and then hold the shift key and click where you want the line to end, it will draw a straight line. So it's an easy way with any kind of brush that you can draw a nice straight line. So let's just do a couple of these so the next effect will show up better. Okay, let's do it across the top. Okay, so now we have our shapes. So the next thing I want to do is to, let's see, we got this done. I want to actually add a stroke around here of a color, not a white edge. So I'm going to double click in a blank area of this layer, and that will bring up the layer style panel. So I'm going to select stroke, and you don't want to just click this little box. You need to click that whole line so that you get the proper controls in here for the particular effect that you want. So I'm going to make mine 8 pixels. Let's just type it. Whoops. And you can always reopen it if you click and close it by accident. I want the opacity to be 100%. And I want the position of it. You can either go around the outside of it. I'm going to click center so that 4 pixels are inside the box, 4 pixels are outside. So if I had any other ragged edges, it's going to cover that with those 4 pixels, if any other little white showing. And I'm going to change the color to 543 D31. So a darker brown. Say okay. And I also want to add a little bit of a drop shadow. And I'm going to leave it at normal. The opacity I'm going to bring down to 22. I like 135 for my angle so that the light is coming from the upper left to the lower right, but you can change that depending on what it is that you're doing. And then the distance, spread, and size control the, how far and how soft the shadow is. So for these, I wanted distance 32, 23, and again, you would, play around with it to, move the sliders and see what looks good. And then say, okay. So when I finished this, I liked the effect, but I didn't like the blue sky on these 3 panels. I really thought it was cooler with just the, the different colors of the car. So I have another version that is finished here. And I'll just open it for you because the process was the same. What I did was I cropped in on the image. So I got rid of the sky. But then I wasn't sure I really liked the dirt. I kind of like, the big rock down here. And that I like that better than the one with the sky. But then I tried a third version and it becomes a real abstract. And I used a black background instead of the texture. And it just became this really cool abstract graffiti kind of looking thing. So, once you try something, you can always try something else because there's always more that you can do. So the idea of, everything I've shown you tonight is to experiment and play around, whether you're only using Photoshop or you have, the Nick collection or any of the other software. Just play and experiment and see what you can come up with. Any questions on this project?
Yes, one question.
If you wanted
Sure.
to print that in 5 separate images, how would you go about that?
The question is, if you'd like to print that in 5 separate images, and I'm guessing frame it and mat it like that, how would you go ahead and do that?
If I were going to print it, I would print it with probably a white back. Well, it's going to print on white paper, so I would just get rid of the background image and print it like that. You could either leave it transparent or make it white. It's going to print on white paper, and then you could, trim them out and put them on whatever color mat board that you wanted to, or frame them individually. You could, if you had larger paper too, if you wanted to spread them apart, if you needed, a bigger border for mounting, you could, do that. And the way you would do that is you could use that rectangular marquee tool and just go around in between the images and put each one on a separate layer. So then you can move them around. So then come back here, select the next one and do a Control J. So now you could move these around. You could have just one white page underneath, but you could move this on the page. You could, well, if you get off that tool and go to the move tool, then you could move it, and spread them apart so that you had more room to cut them, and mount them individually. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Hazel, I have a question. Are you at the end of your demonstration?
I am.
I wanted to save this one for the end. When you're out getting textures, what's your kind of thought process on textures, and how do you sort your own textures in a library for further use?
That's a very good question. I've actually I did a survey the end of December of my readers to see what topics they want coming up, and one of them is kind of organizing things, and I did do something on that. I know one of my webinars probably a year or so ago. If you go to I'll answer your question more in a second. If you go to my website and click on the webinars page, about halfway down there's a link to a PDF that lists all of the webinars and their topics with a little description, so you could find easier with the one that you want to watch, and they have like the numbers there. So when I'm shooting textures, I like to shoot things, really anything can be a texture, but rusty metal is great. I do that a lot with those. And like I said, I like to modify my textures as well. Some of these that I've used tonight, let me bring over my other screen. These are what we did tonight. This was a photograph. This was a photograph. These were created in Procreate on my iPad. This is a photograph. The borders I created with brushes. This one was various things in Photoshop. This is also brushes in Photoshop. So a lot of them I create digitally, but when I'm photographing, rust is great. Grass can even be a texture. Brick walls, stonework, concrete, almost anything can become a texture. I do a presentation on, textures, and I go into a little bit of, what to photograph and kind of what you can do with them. So you'll have to have me back for that in the future. But yeah, definitely, look for things when you're photographing. Graffiti on a wall. if you don't have Cadillac Ranch in front of you, there, you may be somewhere where there's some graffiti. Um, just virtually anything. I have one texture I shot quite a few years ago. I was out teaching at a club on Cape Cod, and the day after, the couple I stayed with and I went out photographing in the morning before I left, and we were at a marina, and they had like a painted walkway across the parking lot. It was like with green paint. And the three of us were standing there photographing the ground because it was this really cool, because it was over the blacktop. It had a lot of texture to it. And if people saw us, they would have probably all thought we were crazy shooting the ground. But it was a great texture, and it's one that I've used quite a few times. And again, you can always modify them by changing textures. You can add a hue and saturation layer to something to change the texture or to change the color. It's endless. It really is totally endless. And as far as organizing, I probably have the worst setup because I have a lot of my own textures. So those are in like a separate folder that are ready to go into my, the online store. So mine are separate, but then I have a folder of photo assets. And in here, I have from a bunch of stuff from different companies. And some of these are textures and some are like clip art type stuff. I have borders, I have brushes, and then I do have a folder of textures and backgrounds. These are ones we created over the years, my husband and I. And when I started saving them, I wasn't creating my own. So I started saving them by the company they were from. But then it got really hard to remember, like, well, what did this one have in it? And what did that one have in it? So then I started creating folders of the types of textures. So in abstract, I then have, a bunch that are, these happen to be by one person, but they're very abstract textures. I may have some that are fall. Let's see what we got. Fallish kind of colors. And they probably call it a fall set when I purchased it. So I try to separate them by what they are rather than, as, the company as much. Here's some rust. Let's see. Oh, we got lots of rust. So yeah, rusty things like this are great. And then you can, again, I like to use, I have the old Topaz Studio. Their impression filter is great for taking a rust texture and turning it into something completely different that doesn't even look like rust. It's like a painterly look when you're done. So I think doing them by category is probably the best way to do that. It makes it easier to find what you think you would want to use. Sound good?
Fantastic. Any other questions? I don't have any questions online. Hazel, thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed it and had, some practice and do some cool stuff. And like I said, my blog, you can also find that through the website, which is meredithimages.com. Check out our conference that's coming up. We have 8 speakers over the 2 days, 13 hours of seminars, and it's the early bird price till the beginning of February is $49. And everything's recorded, and you have 60 days to watch the recordings. You get speaker notes and a goodie bag, and we always have over $2,500 worth of door prizes that we do at the end of the day on Sunday. You don't have to be online to win. So if you can't watch it live, you can catch the recordings and then check out some of my workshops. I'm also, I have some spring workshops scheduled, and this weekend I'm going to be posting one for September in Sedona, Arizona. I've done a few out there before, and we're going out. We have a timeshare there, so we're going out for a week, and so I'm going to do another workshop while we're there.
That's perfect.
And and one of the places we go is great for textures. It's an old mining kind of camp type thing. It's very cool. So let me stop sharing. And I'll turn on my video and say hey. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope to see you online again.
All right. Thank you so much, Hazel. Make sure to
Alrighty.
check out Hazel's website, which is Meredith Images, MEREDITH images.com. Christine is going to send out an email either tonight or tomorrow morning that Meredith sent with all her information as well.
Great.
And I want to remind people next week is digital contests with the theme of open. And then on the 16th, the program, Jackie Colstock on geometric shapes. You're going to need that for our February theme contests. Thanks again, Hazel, and thanks
Sounds
everybody for
cool.
joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night. Take care.